Welcome everyone to the Manifest Incredible Love Show. Today we have a very special guest. Her name is Leah Carey. Welcome, Leah.
Thank you so much for having me, Nikki.
Thank you for being here. And for the audience, would you please introduce yourself and give us a little bit of information of what you do currently?
Sure. So, as you said, my name is Leah. I am a sex and intimacy coach. I work with people, both individuals and couples, around how to have a more fulfilling sex life. And I come at it through the perspective of what were the lessons that we learned as little kids? How were we socialized as children? Because a lot of those lessons are still affecting us as adults when we walk into the bedroom in not super helpful ways. And so it's all about like unlearning old myths about sexuality and figuring out who you really want to be and what you really want to do with your body and with your sexuality. And I also host the podcast Good Girls Talk About Sex, where I interview people who were brought up as little girls, plus transgender women. So anyone who is brought up as a little girl, regardless of their gender as an adult, plus transgender women. And they're just everyday women talking about their sex lives.
Thank you so much for that. And before we dive deep into those juicy details you just shared with us, I want to know like your backstory and how do you even get into the space?
Yeah. So I did not come to this having had like a magical upbringing where sex was really easy and I understood it. I was actually incredibly sexually repressed well into my early 40s. I grew up in a home where sexuality was really confusing. My father was an alcoholic. And part of the way that he acted out was emotional and verbal abuse. He also was inappropriate with me. So he was just inappropriate sexually in general. And I happened to be in the way of that. So he talked to me sexually about my body. He talked to me about his sex life with my mother and how unhappy he was with it. He spoke to women other than my mother sexually in front of me, and talked to me sexually about other women. So it was all just really confusing. He was also, by the time I started puberty, he also started telling me that I was getting fat and unattractive to the point that nobody would be interested in me. He also told me that he was going to lock me in my room until I was 30 so that I could be protected. So it was like, who am I supposed to be? Am I so attractive that you have to lock me away, or so undesirable that no one will ever want me? And so by the time I was in middle school, inside my brain, I was like, oh, boy, crazy. Like, where are the boys? I want to kiss them all. And then later, by the time I was in college, I became girl crazy too. But that was all internally. Externally, you never would have known because I had shut it down so completely. I didn't flirt. I didn't make eye contact with people I was interested in. I just didn't any of that. I did not allow myself to express any sort of femininity or sexuality at all. And that is pretty much the space I stayed in for most of my adult life. I got involved in a few relationships, but they were with people who echoed my father's messaging, told me that I was unattractive, told me that they were the only person who would ever love me, that kind of thing. And I accepted it because that was, I thought, all that I was worthy of. I thought I was supposed to just be grateful for the fact that someone was willing to pay attention to me. So that's the backstory, which gets us up to me being 42. So 5-6 years ago. My father passed away when I was in my 20s. So he was no longer an active voice in my life. He was just an active voice in my head. Like I kept hearing him even though he was gone. Um, but when I was 41, my mother passed away.
Um,
And that was really, thank you. She and I were extremely close, and that was really hard. She was also the only link I still had back to that part of my life with my dad. So even though she never repeated any of those messages to me that he had given me, I still sort of had this idea of myself as a person who doesn't get into relationships, who doesn't have sex, who's embarrassed if I do, who's afraid of being made fun of for just demonstrating interest in people. I just had this image of myself as a really, really good girl. And my mom was my last tie to that image of myself. So once she was gone, I, a lot of this was sort of under the surface. I wasn't super conscious of it yet. But what that allowed me to do was say, I'm going to leave everything behind. I'm going to leave my job. I'm going to leave my home. I'm going to leave everything. I had inherited a little bit of money from her, so I had the privilege of being able to take some time off. And I said, I'm just going to travel around the United States on a solo road trip and figure out what I want to do with my life next.
oh my goodness.
And that was when I ended up having this profound experience of sexual healing while I was on the road that led me to start the podcast. And then people started asking me questions. And so it organically turned into coaching. And that's how I ended up where I am today.
That's incredible. I want to dive into that too. What was it on your road trip that like helped you shift your perspective on sex and sexuality and who you wanted to be?
Yeah. Um, you know that old Aeneas Nin quote, and I should memorize it so I have the words exactly, but it's something about like the staying tight in a bud eventually became so painful that the flower finally chose to blossom.
Mhm.
That's kind of where I was. It had become so painful to stay so invisible and to stay so um internal. Like I so wanted to share my life with somebody, with a partner, but also with a community. I didn't really open myself to have a community of friends either. It was just so painful. um so I was working with a therapist before. So I used to live in New Hampshire. I was working with a therapist to get ready to take this trip. And on my very last appointment with her, she said, okay, we have 15 minutes left. This is our final appointment. You're about to get on the road. Are there any last little things you want to talk about before we finish up? And I finally got up the courage to ask the question that I had been wanting to ask somebody somewhere for years, which was, um, I don't have any sexual sensation. Can we do something about that? Am I broken? And it was safe to ask her because I was never going to see her again,
Yeah.
because there were 15 minutes left. And her response was brilliant. There were so many ways she could have responded that would have been made things even worse. But instead, what she said was, this is not my area of expertise. So I don't think that it would be appropriate for me to talk to you about this. But you're about to go out on this road trip, and I'm sure you're going to end up somewhere where you could make an appointment with a sex therapist. And that blew my doors open because I had been thinking for years about wanting to visit a sex therapist or even a sex worker,
Mhm.
because I thought, well, they know how bodies work. So, like, maybe they could teach me how mine works. But I was so invested in this idea of myself as the good girl that I never did it. And I didn't know I was looking for permission until she gave it to me. And suddenly I was like, oh my God, I can do this thing. And so that was the first step on the journey. I ended up not seeing a sex therapist because I've been in therapy on and off most of my life. I was like, I'm done talking. I'm so tired of talking. I just want somebody to put their hands on my body. And so I ended up finding a woman in New York City who does something called tantric massage.
Mhm.
And that was my first step. I had an appointment with her. And at the end of the appointment, she sat down with me because I had been very clear with her about what the issues were. Like once the dam broke, I was like, I'm just telling everybody all the things. I'm going to be wide open because I want this done with. And at the end of the session, she sat down with me and she said, you're not broken. I can see your body having all of the responses that I would expect you to have. Your brain isn't receiving the pleasure signals yet. And so that's probably going to be a process of just letting people touch you and finding the enjoyment in that, finding the pleasure in that, so that you reconnect the neural pathways in your brain for pleasure. Because right now you're too scared to feel it. And so then I spent the year that I was traveling around the United States going on dating apps anytime I landed in a city for a week or more, going on to Craigslist. Craigslist Personals unfortunately no longer exists, but it was a huge part of my journey. And I would, set up dates with people. And I just gave myself the experience of being in lots of different situations. I put a very good vetting system in place, so I was not putting myself in danger, or at least to the best of my ability. But over the course of that year, I heard lots of different people in lots of different places say exactly the same words to me. I love your ass. I love you playing with your boobs. Like I had long curly hair. I love your curls, like that kind of thing. Just over and over hearing the same words
Mhm.
started to reset my own perception of myself.
Wow, that is so powerful. As you're speaking, I am relating to my own personal experiences too. I came from a very critical background where like my mom would always criticize me. And I grew up with this perception of I'm not good enough, like I'm not enough. And so exploring my own sexuality when it came to like confidence in my body happened through the gym when I was like working out.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually people started to notice that because I was investing in myself, like other people would tell me, you look amazing. And I never, ever in a million years would have thought I looked amazing. I was always jealous of the pretty girls at work, and they always had the attention. Um, and I was never looking for attention, and I didn't even know that I was seeking attention at some
Yeah.
point until that happened and people started giving me attention. And I said, am I actually beautiful? Like,
Mm.
am I actually pretty? And that took me to another level where I had to heal from this after like 2 years after I lost my body. I wouldn't say I lost my body, but like all the confidence I had in my body disappeared when I got pregnant
Mm-hmm.
because I attach that self-worth now to another external
Yeah.
circumstance
Mm-hmm.
of what other people thought about me, because that was what I was conditioned when I was younger. You're too fat, you're too small, you're too this, you're too that. You're just not good at anything. And therefore, I'm not good at anything. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I got that external validation, finally, it did shift within me something. But then when I lost it again, I lost that connection too.
Mm.
Um, so I completely resonate in certain aspects of your story. And I feel very deeply for that because a lot of people do experience that from their childhood of what they're not allowed to do, that permission that we're seeking of just acceptance. We just want acceptance.
Yes. Yeah. One of the things that has always really troubled me is this. th- at this point, it's a cliche, nobody else will love you until you can love yourself. There's actually there's a real problem with that, in that people like me, and I don't, you've just told me a tiny bit of your story, so I don't want to make assumptions, but it sounds like potentially people like you, we didn't get the proper mirroring as children to develop that internal self-confidence and that internal self knowledge. So to say, well, nobody else is going to love you until you fix that stuff about yourself,
Mhm.
is so harmful, when in fact, what I absolutely needed was for other people to mirror back to me the things I had not heard before, which was that I was acceptable, I was lovable, I was desirable. And it was through hearing that repetition that I began being able to reset myself. But if I had been, just waiting and waiting on talk therapy to fix my own self image before I allowed myself to get involved with somebody else, I would still be waiting.
Thank you for sharing that, because it is an important message that sometimes actions allow you to experience. Like the experience is more powerful than the studying behind the desk, kind of.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Sometimes you just gotta go and do it.
Yeah.
So I do have a few questions
Yeah.
in regards to your specialty about proper communication before engaging in sexual activity, because even as a married woman, like I still find that communication when it comes to sex and not exactly knowing what I like. How would you navigate that outside of a relationship and also like inside of a relationship?
Yeah, it's such a big, important question because, I said at the beginning, I really work with people. My focus is around how we were socialized as children. If you think about how the majority of little girls are socialized, not everyone, but a vast majority of little girls are socialized to sit down, look pretty, take care of everybody else first, don't ask for too much, don't have big needs, take care of your own stuff so nobody else has to pay too much attention. Then let's just assume a heterosexual relationship. A little boy is socialized to grow up and be strong. Don't ask too many questions, because asking questions means you're weak. You don't know what you're supposed to know. And being weak is the biggest downfall of any proper little boy. Um, and just sort of make sure that you know everything without having to ask any questions. So you grow up and you put these two people in a bedroom together. One of them doesn't know how to ask for what she wants, and probably doesn't even know what she wants in a lot of cases because nobody has ever asked her and then sat long enough to listen to her figure it out. And you have the other partner who doesn't know how to ask for directions. This is not a space that is conducive to good communication or to helping women to find their desire and their pleasure and communicate that and advocate for it. So that is a big picture problem that I see day in and day out in relationship after relationship. And I also want to point out that there are going to be people who hear this and are like, oh, well, it would be so much easier if I were in a same-sex relationship. It's not any easier. Like there are still so many issues regardless of the gender makeup. um, but it does, just talking about it in terms of heterosexual makes it a little bit clearer to show the distinctions. um, so when we're talking about figuring out what you like, because that's, so for instance, a woman comes to me and she says, I want my partner to touch me differently. I don't feel satisfied or fulfilled by the way that my husband is touching me. I say, great, this is such a good place to start. How would you like him to be touching you? And almost to a person, they get the big deer in headlights look and they say, oh, I don't know. I know that I don't like what I'm getting. Yeah. So the first thing is to start paying attention to what your turn-ons are and realizing that the way that I'm not going to get too deep into physiology because frankly, that's not my specialty. I don't know a ton about it, but the way that testosterone peaks for turn on is very fast. And we know that men tend to be very visual. They can see something they like and they get turned on. The way that estrogen peaks is very different. It's much slower, much more gradual. And it takes time and it takes some patience. But as women, we believe that we're supposed to turn on the same way that men do, at the same speed and with the same, quickness. And if we don't, we believe we're the ones who are broken. When in fact, what's happening is we're just not having the amount of time that we need to get to turn on. And many of our turn-ons aren't necessarily sexual. Like they're not actually touching. So for instance, for me, my very first, most basic turn on, you are not getting any of my clothes off until this happens. I have to have a good connected conversation with someone. Without that, I cannot get turned on. My partner and I have been together for coming up on 4 years. So like the conversation piece is there, like that's just sort of established. One of my biggest turn-ons is when we are cuddling, and we tend to do a lot of cuddling because that's important for both of us. When we're cuddling and there is no expectation of anything else happening, that's when my turn on happens. If we're cuddling and he's groping me, my turn on does not happen. Because at that point, I'm paying attention to what he needs and what he wants, and I'm not in touch with my own body. So that's what I mean when I say our turn-ons are not necessarily always about sex. I talked to one woman who was like, yeah, my turn-ons are a guy in a cowboy boots and cowboy hat. Like, you show me that and I'm in. And then what are the ways that you want to touch and be touched? And this is a real puzzle for a lot of women. Again, in heterosexual situations, we spend a ton of our time paying attention to what our partner wants and fulfilling their needs and never asking ourselves what we want beyond, I want to fulfill his needs. So start watching TV with an eye to what are the situations that I find that I get sort of juiced up when I see them.
Yeah.
Reading books, like whether it's, trashy romances, which I'm totally in favor of, or, more literary novels where there are good sex scenes, or like literally online erotica. There are vast websites filled with online erotica. If words turn you on, spend some time in those places reading and seeing what are the things that turn you on. And then you can start playing with them. You can start sort of asking here and there to incorporate some of that stuff and see if you like it. Because not every one of your fantasies is going to translate whole scale into real life. So for instance, one of my biggest fantasies is about sort of power play, a little bit of dominance and submission, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
When my partner and I have played that out a few times, it does not work for me in real life. I actually don't enjoy it. So the fantasies are not necessarily meant to translate into real life. But that doesn't mean that it's, you can try them out and find out so that you're working with real information as opposed to just sort of like, I think maybe, I don't know.
I love that. I love that. And recently, as I was like going through websites, I saw a sexual archetype quiz, and it was like a cute 14 question quiz. But I sat there and I asked my husband, I said, "Can you take this quiz? I just want to sit there and watch you select the options."
Oh,
And the options had certain words like, do you prefer to be pursued, or like have your partner show you and that they're completely devoted to you? Do you prefer to be in a certain setting? Do you like a comfortable bed? And then there would be pictures of like candles or toys or lubricant or lingerie. And as I went through the quiz, I picked different things that what he chose. And that moment clicked for me, that we've been together for 12 years and we knew certain things that we liked, but we never communicated about what really, really turned us on. And some of the things you mentioned, like reading books and watching movies, I love those scenes. I absolutely
yeah.
love those scenes. And I would turn to him and I would be like, so spicy. Right, he knows right away that I'm either reading one of those fantasy novels where they do go into a lot of sex scenes, or I'm watching, just nowadays, a lot of the TV shows have very, very intricate sex scenes, and I'm just like, oh my God, so spicy. And I would look at him and I'll be like, can you do?
Yes, yes, exactly.
But I knew through just a short little quiz like that, opened up my eyes to so much, because like I would be the person that chooses like new experiences and trying out toys and all of that stuff, and he chose a comfortable bed and candlelight and lingerie and long foreplay, and I was like, oh, like we've been together for 12 years and I didn't really like that, didn't click for me because nobody really said anything. We just kind of knew what turned each other on physically, but not like environmentally, like that mental space
Yes.
of creating the ambiance and the environment to get into the mood, to feel safe to talk about. I don't really like that. Let's try a different position, which now we've gotten really good at. Let's try a different position. It doesn't feel good for me. But
Mhm.
I started feeling a disconnect between the physical interaction and the environmental and the mental like space, because I was like, I don't feel the same as I did when I was like a teenager, where all the hormones were raging and we could just
No.
do it anywhere, and it was all about the physical pleasure. And now it's not all about the physical pleasure. It's about the emotional connection, the mental connection, the environment, the ambiance, like those matter now. And as I'm
Yes.
shifting into that, I'm like, why does it feel different? Why does it feel different? I had to ask myself that for like a whole year. And I'm like, I never really, I never really sat down and was like, maybe there's something, maybe there's something wrong because we've just been together for so long. Maybe,
Yeah.
you know,
And the truth is, there's not anything wrong. You just need to update your sort of sexual playlist, if you will. You know, there's an amazing exercise called a yes, no, maybe list. I have one on my website. I'll give you the link if you want to add it to the notes for this. It's at leahcarey.com/yes, no. It's like I don't know, 12, 14 pages long, filled with just lists of, do you like, are you interested in this type of activity? Yes, no, maybe. And it goes from super, super simple, like holding hands and light kissing, all the way up to like spanking and restraints and, you know,
wow.
alcohol, you want to use alcohol or you don't, and, like all sorts of stuff. And you each fill it out separately. And then you come to, so that you say, yes, this is something I definitely want to do during our playtime. No, this is something I'm not interested in all. And maybe this is something I might be interested in under the right circumstances with the right communication and negotiation first. And then you come together and you exchange your lists and you see where you have matching points so that you can, and it's not unusual for couples to find out that they have some shared interests that neither of them has expressed to the other. Yeah.
I love that. I'm gonna do it. I
All right,
love
good.
those quizzes. I love them so much. Like any type of personality slash like characteristics quiz that helps you understand yourself better. Like I'm on it.
Yes. Yes, I love it.
Now, when it comes to like this is for like audience members who are single and exploring, and you
Yeah.
mentioned that you reached out and you had like a vetting program. Can you go into that? Like I'm curious how people can do this safely, um,
Yeah.
and protect themselves as they're exploring and figuring out what they even want.
Yeah. Such an important question that doesn't get talked about very much. Um, so I knew that I was going into these experiences. If I was only in, say, Washington, D.C. for a week, I was not looking for a long-term partner. I was looking to go out on a date with somebody, see if I was interested in them enough to, make out and, maybe get a little handsy. So this is going to be a little bit different for people who are actually looking for long-term relationships, but I'll tell you what I did. When I found somebody online, I would reach out to them. And I was in spaces where usually I was the one doing the reaching out. Like I was on Bumble, where the woman always makes the first move, or on Craigslist, I was making sure that I was the one who was reaching out to people. So I would reach out to them and I would say, hi, like this is what I'm interested in. This is kind of, I'm only here for a few days. Here's what I'm interested in. Is this something that you're interested in? So I've put I've put what I'm looking for out on the table right away. So I'm immediately eliminating anybody who's not interested in the same thing I am.
Mm.
Um, and the people who are lying, because they're going to be people who are lying. And then I would give them, if they answered positively, I would give them some instructions. The order of this would be a little bit different on Craigslist. So let's say I put up a Craigslist ad. In the ad, I would say, if you're going to respond to me, sorry, I just got distracted by a notification on my phone. When you respond to me, use this subject line and include this in your message to me. So like 2 or 3 things, instructions that they had to follow.
Wow.
If they didn't follow those instructions, I immediately eliminated them. Because if somebody can't respect my needs enough to follow a couple of incredibly simple cut and paste directions, I'm not going to take my clothes off with them. Once we get to the point of establishing an actual date, I ask for enough information that I can find them online. So that I know what their full name is. Maybe I don't know exactly where they live, but I sort of maybe know where they work, like enough to find them. Maybe they give me the make and model of their car. So if we're, meeting somewhere where we're driving, stuff like that, things that are identifiable. And I send all of that information to a friend. And I say, this is when we're going, this is where we're going, and this is when I expect to be home. If you haven't heard from me by this time, please check in with me. And if you don't hear back from me, call in the National Guard. And then I can either check in with my friend and say, I'm home, it was or I'm home and it was amazing, or I'm still out and having a great time. I'll check in with you again in the morning. But no matter what, I have somebody who knows where I am and who I'm with, so that if something were to go wrong, there are ways to sort of hopefully find me and trace what happened. That left me feeling safe enough to do these things. With that said, had my mother been alive, she would have been horrified.
I love that you shared the importance of sharing this with somebody else, because I think like for a lot of us who are just exploring sex and who come from a background of, like you said, like good girls, because I would consider myself one too. Just I come from a very traditional Asian household, and we never talked about sex. We never touched on the topic of dating or how to properly like communicate, go on dates, any of that. um and so I always thought that was like people never talked about their sex life. And so I never talked about my sex life. And it was only very recently, like a year or so ago, that I got curious and I was like, what is your sex life like? Like, I just want to know. Like, I'm so curious. Even though I have a husband, we're also very reserved. We're both from Asian families. So you mentioning like being able to have a safe conversation and allowing somebody to know where you are, what you're doing, I think that's a huge conversation point, especially for younger generations now too, where everything is online. Everything's
Yeah.
online, and you don't know exactly who you're speaking to, who you're meeting up with, and to be able to have these conversations is very, very important.
Yeah. Now that we live in the age of Zoom, which
Yeah.
like there were ways to video chat when I was doing this 5 years ago, but it never would have occurred to me. Now that we live in the age of Zoom, I would not meet somebody without first having a video conversation with them to
Mm,
make sure that they are who they're presenting themselves to be. And that I just generally get a good feeling about them. So
nice.
that would definitely be my first. And, this is a bit of an aside, but what you were just saying about the reserve of Asian families in talking about sex, um, I generally have a really hard time getting Asian women to come onto the podcast to talk about their sex lives for exactly that reason, because they're so unused to talking about it that it feels like it's just not something. Well, also that, and the just extreme fetishization that Asian women experience, and I think that that plays into it as well. But it always feels to me like I need to explain why there are fewer Asian women on the podcast than other groups, because I actively reach out to a lot and have very little success in getting a yes.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I can see that because everything right now it's shifting a little bit. We are having more conversations about it, and I see it in spaces like Instagram groups as well as Facebook groups of people speaking up and also speaking out on topics such as your mental health and well-being. And that was considered taboo to
Mm,
say like, oh, I'm not okay, or to even express that you have emotions and that you can't meet expectations,
yeah.
though that was seen as like you're not good enough. And it always returned back to that topic of you're not good enough, so therefore like don't say anything, don't
Yeah.
mention that you're struggling, don't mention that you have problems. First and foremost, don't mention that you have problems to anybody.
Yeah.
And so can you imagine like just that plus like forget about sex, right? Like
Hmm.
we're so focused on our careers most of the time because that was what was valued. And these conversations that I'm having with individuals now is shifting the balance to be more open because everybody has sex. Like everybody has sex, just nobody's having these conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. So if
We
any of your listeners are Asian women who want to talk about their sex lives, please hit me up. I am looking for you.
definitely, I quote because I just said your favorite quote, but like three things that you find is the most important in regards to women and their sexuality and how they can shift something so easily today?
Mm. Um, so number one would be believing that people want to love you. And, this is true, first of all, no matter of your shape or size, no matter your skin color, your age, your any of those things, there are people who want to love you exactly as you are. I can say this with absolute confidence because I've seen it happen. Um, I will give you the very short version of this story, which is that I ended up on a beach during my year of travel. I ended up on a beach in Jamaica that was a nude, like no clothing allowed. And there were people there. And I was paying attention to the women because they're the ones who I was comparing myself against. There were people there in very, very large bodies and people in teeny tiny bodies and people on walkers and just like the entire gamut of humanity. I was not expecting that. I thought that I would be the only non-model-esque person there, and I was not at all. And every single one of those people had someone looking at them with desire. I
I,
know for absolute certain, I can promise you that there are people who want to love you exactly as you are today. So believing that you don't even have to believe that it's true, but you can believe that I believe it's true for you. Like sometimes it's too hard to make that leap to, oh my God, well, she said it, so it must be true. Or it's true for everybody else, but it can't possibly, they don't know me. Like it's not true for me. I promise you, it is true for you. And if you can't believe that yet, believe that I believe it for you. Let's see, number two, believe that the person who loves you, whether it's someone who you're already in relationship with or you're looking for someone to be in relationship with, believe that they want to hear your truth. Believe that they want to hear what turns you on. They want to touch you the way that turns you on. Believe that they are strong enough to handle the truth about who you are and what you want. Let's see. So that's two. Let me think of a third one. Um, you are worthy of pleasure. You are not broken. This is like one of the biggest questions. I experience XYZ. Am I broken? No, you're not broken. It's quite possible you haven't had the kind of touch yet that really works for your body, or you haven't had the connection yet that works for your body, or like me, you have some emotional junk in the way of experiencing your pleasure, but you're not broken. It's just a question of doing a little digging to find what's going to work for you.
Thank you so much. I also know that you have a wonderful gift for the audience. Could you share that with us and how they can? Oh, I'm going to include the link, but could you share what the free gift is?
Yes. So it's called the 3-minute game. And this is so that you can explore different kinds of touch with another person. And if you're partnered, it can be your partner. If you're not partnered, it can be somebody who you enjoy sharing touch with. Like there's no requirement that it be with a partner. But what happens is you ask the other person how they would like to be touched for 3 minutes, and then you touch them that way. And then it goes the other way. They ask you, how would you like to be touched for 3 minutes? And you tell them, and you get to experience being touched exactly the way that you asked for. And if it's not exactly what you want, you get to change your ask. It can be really scary to ask for what you want. So this is a way to start practicing it in a sort of structure and to experience really getting what you've asked for and only what you've asked for, not having it be like, I know there are so many people who are like, oh, this is the thing I want, but I'm not going to ask for it because I'm afraid that my partner will push it and it will lead to something I don't want. So this is a structure in which you ask for you get exactly that and only that. So it's called the 3-minute game, and there will be a link on the site.
Thank you so much, Leah, for your generous free gift for the audience and for being here today. It was such a pleasure to have you. And for everybody who is watching, please stay tuned and come back. We have many, many more amazing, incredible interviews. And I will see you guys on the next episode.